Welcome everybody. We are going to get started in just 1 minute here. If you're rolling in, just going to give folks 1 more minute to get in here, and we'll get started. All right, I think let's get started here. Welcome everybody. Thank you for showing up. Thanks for your interest in this. My name is Kevin Stark. I'm a climate change reporter here at KQED. And joining me today to talk about big wave surfing and climate change are Bianca Valenti, a San Franciscan, one of the best big wave surfers in the world. Bianca is a force in and out of the water. She was named one of Outside Magazine's most accomplished athletes in 2018. Her surfing performance and advocacy work has been highlighted many times on KQED, but also in the New York Times Magazine, BBC World News, ESPN, Surfer Magazine, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Bianca Valenti is an entrepreneur, a public figure, a leader, and an environmentalist. Welcome, Bianca. Thank you for joining us here.
Stoked to be here.
Glad you're here. And then also with us today is Grant Washburn, who has notched 3 decades as a big wave surfer at Mavericks near Half Moon Bay, where he is a student of the waves. Grant is an elder in the Bay Area's big wave surfing community and kind of an unofficial historian of Mavericks, maybe an official historian, truthfully at this point. Some of his high profile book and movie projects include the book Inside Mavericks with Bruce Jenkins and Stacy Peralta's documentary Riding Giants. Grant also participated in the film Chasing Mavericks, where he taught Gerard Butler how to ride big waves, nearly drowning him in the process and then saving his life. So thank you for that, Grant. Thank you for joining us. Glad you're here.
Absolutely. Good to be here. Thanks.
Okay, so what are we here to do tonight? Why are we here? What are we going to do? We're here, I think, because surfing is really an important thing, especially here in California. The last California surfing census that I could find, conducted nearly 2 decades ago at this point, found that there was 1.1 million surfers in this state, and that number has likely skyrocketed with the sport's popularity over the past 2 decades. Surfing is a billion-dollar industry in this country. Surfing has shaped California cultures, economies, identities of entire cities. Surfing waves are truly one of the most important resources on our coast. But with all aspects of life, California surfing is changing as a result of climate change. I think the impacts are complicated and varied and different from break to break. And in a lot of places, rising sea levels, the changing direction of ocean waves, and other impacts could have really a negative impact on surf breaks and obviously on coastal communities. But today, we're going to be zeroing in on one of the impacts, which is that warming temperatures are creating larger and more powerful waves, creating what legendary surf forecaster Mark Sponsler has called a golden age of big wave surfing. So to put it simply, talent in this sport is ascending to new heights, just as the waves are. So that's why we're here. And this is a little bit about what we're going to do. I'm going to start with a little Wave Mechanics 101, talk about the climate science, and preview a little bit of reporting that I'm going to have coming out in the next week or so. And then we're going to hear from Grant and Bianca. We'll be focusing tonight's conversation around Mavericks, which is a legendary big wave surf break near Half Moon Bay. As always, I'm saving time at the end for questions. So I'd like to invite you to just put them in the chat. We're going to collect them at the end, and we'll have about 15 minutes to get as many of those in as we can. So with that, I'm going to just do a little bit of just Wave Mechanics 101. I just want to kind of set the stage for us. And I think a good place to start with this is just with this simple idea, which is that a wave passing across the ocean surface is really easy to see, but the mechanics for that motion are really pretty hard to describe. I think it's really helpful to define the properties of the waves and the dimensions, and that can kind of help us establish an understanding of the relationships between them. So waves are measured by their height, right, which is how tall they are. Then there's the period, which is the time between crests, and then the length, which is the distance between the two peaks. Waves for Mavericks, the spot near Half Moon Bay, begin many, many, many miles away in the northern Pacific during really big storms, typically in the winter months. These raging storms generate tremendous energy. This is transferred by wind from the air to the surface of the ocean, creates what are called wind-generated waves. This is the stuff that surfers are always talking about, they're most interested in. A wave's size is determined by the wind speed, the amount of time that the storm is raging against the water, and then the distance that the storm travels over the ocean. So energy, this is interesting, energy in the waves produced by these storms is fixed and it's also conserved. So it's stored between the seafloor and the ocean surface. Most of the time, this distance is more than half of the wave's length, right? So wave energy moves across the ocean surface, but the actual water only circulates in this small motion. So the mechanics of the wave depends on the contour, the bathymetry of the ocean floor beneath. So rocks, beaches, reefs, they act kind of like speed humps on a bike trail. They slow the waves down, they compress it, and then the wave's energy only has one direction to go, which is up. This is called amplification. It creates the kind of peaks that surfers are always talking about. At this point, all of the wave's stored potential energy is converted into kinetic energy, pushing a wave up, amplifying it, rising it to a breaking point. And at Mavericks, waves break with incredible force. Waves have to approach from the perfect angle, west, northwest, and can rise to be the size of small apartment buildings, 40, 50, 60, even beyond feet tall. So the reason for big waves at Mavericks really has to do with the ocean floor there, a canyon beneath the wave with huge rocks jutting up from above. Waves traveling from the deep water slow down at the rocky reef. They bend, the wave bends like a rubber band, a process called refraction. This focuses the energy at what is where the waves line up at Mavericks. So this is just like the basic mechanics on a really high level of waves breaking. Now, I just want to talk very briefly about some of the impacts of warming ocean water. So as temperatures and ocean water warm, evaporation is increasing, and this is just pumping more energy into the jet stream, generating more ferocious storms over the open ocean, which is the genesis of Mavericks and its towering waves. Really, really simply, basically, bigger storms, bigger waves. Oceanographers from UC Santa Cruz have actually quantified this in research that shows the energy in ocean waves, what they call wave power, has increased over a period of roughly 8 decades, averaging about 0.5% per year, with an annual rise over the last 2 decades of about 2.5%. So you see this has actually really been increasing quite a bit over the last 20 years. Bottom line, today's big wave surfers are riding some of the tallest, most powerful waves in modern times, which is creating opportunity in the sport for people like Bianca Valenti, who I want to bring in here. Again, thanks for being here, Bianca. So I think how I want to start this discussion with you is just by playing a clip of you riding what is just like an absolute monster wave. So we're going to cue that up, and I just, the audience can see this video now. I just want to ask you, what is it like to paddle in to some of these towering waves? I read once that you described it as requiring 1,000,000% focus.
Yeah, and I'm psyched to be here, and I thought that your wave description was really great, Kevin. So yeah. So I think if you didn't pick up from Kevin's chat or kind of education portion, no two waves are the same and no swells the same. So that's what's really interesting about big wave surfing and surfing at Mavericks. I'm sure Grant can attest to having this vision and this dream of this big wave coming your way, and then how you play it out. And when it actually happens, it's like totally different than what you thought it would be. And so in the wave that you just saw at Puerto Escondido, I was sitting out quite a bit further out from the rest of the people out in the water that day. And my friend Coco Nogales had just caught a super crazy wave that like blew my mind, broke my mind. It was crazy. He had this super late, steep takeoff, and I was way out further than the pack, and then this huge wave came, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in the spot. And so it's like this intense moment where you have the opportunity to send it and to see what happens, or you can pass it up and then just wonder what would have happened if you took a chance, if you took the opportunity. And so on that one, I was hoping to get barreled and I didn't, as you can see in the clip, but it was still such an incredible drop in. It felt buttery smooth. And then I remember looking back up at the lip and thinking, am I going to get barreled? And seeing the lip there and being like, oh no, don't look too long. And then I wrote it out. And when I saw the clip later, I was like, wow, that wave was huge.
Yes, it was a total monster. Well, so let's talk about climate change a little bit. So, the impacts, complicated, varied, but potentially some of the biggest waves of your career are coming up, right? So I guess, do you agree with Mark Sponsler? Does this feel like a golden age for the sport? I imagine could be kind of exhilarating, adrenaline pumping, terrifying to think about some of the monsters that could be out in your future.
Yeah, I'd say I always agree with Mark Sponsor because he's an expert on the topic, and so is Grant. And it's really exciting to imagine bigger, better waves and swells more often. But is it a golden age? I'll just go with the default to the experts because it's my age, I guess. But I don't know. Grant could probably answer that question about the golden age a little better.
Well, yeah, let's bring Grant in here. So I think what's really, really special about having Grant here is that he's been surfing Mavericks for 30 years and has actually kept a daily record of the conditions, which I think is just an incredible resource on the ground account. This is before surfline cams, before forecast reports. He's been chronicling the conditions at Mavericks. So Grant, I think let's just go back to the beginning. How did this all start for you?
Yeah, funny. I mean, it's before the internet for sure. I mean, we had computers, but we used to get wave facts that would kind of roughly show the satellite over the ocean. And, the knowledge just across the board was pretty low. For myself, I grew up in the East Coast. I knew nothing. Big wave surfers in the North Shore knew more about wave mechanics than most scientists. And, a lot of magic in the forecast back then. And they probably were almost as accurate sometimes. An old fisherman, so anyway, I kept track of it. When I moved here, I had no idea what I was doing. But over the course of that time, I surfed Mavericks in the beginning, in the 90s, early 90s. And there was a couple of years and I thought, oh, wow, this is so awesome. Like every winter is really good. December is always cooking. And then like a couple of bad years go by and it's like, wow, it didn't even snow. If you're a skier, some years are terrible. And it takes a couple of years to you understand that there's good and bad, and what's that variation, like how big a difference is a really good year from a really bad year. And it's actually pretty striking. It's a massive difference. Like you'd have the best day in a year, could be the worst day. You might wait 10 years for a really good day, and then one year you might have 3 in a week.
Can you talk a little bit? Can you talk a little bit about the notation? Because these calendars are so beautiful. It's almost like an art piece. But like, so walk us through? What are you drawing in the date? Like, what is it?
It's pretty simple. Like my original understanding of waves are like the height. In New Jersey, if it's 6 feet, if the face is my height, I'm 6'6". That's a 6-foot wave. In Hawaii, that's like a 4-foot wave. Like, why is that? When a deep ocean swell hits the beach, it throws it up in the air. So the actual measurement in like deep water would be a small wave. And we would pretty much double every number that would be the Hawaiian thing would be a 3 foot wave is 6 or 8 feet in the face. When I was drawing it, I was just drawing what I saw in front of my house at Ocean Beach, and then the color is like if it's a really good day, so kind of a 1 to 10. If it's a terrible day, it's white, it's kind of stormy, you probably can't surf it. If it's all black, that's a really good day, like beautiful glassy weather. And if it's giant and black, those are special because big waves come a lot of times in a storm or the storm is nearby. So the weather is usually unfavorable. So a lot of us that like big waves, we ride a lot of bad waves because that's when they're big. And in the East Coast, it's almost exclusively that kind of. So I was like, I love stormy bad waves because that's the only time they had any real size to them. And this year was special because there was a ton of really, really big days that were perfect. And the only thing that was scary was how big they were, and not the wind or the current or the other stuff that usually would keep you from going after 100-footer.
Oh, absolutely. And I definitely want to talk about this year. We're going to get to that in just a second. Before we do that, can you just tell people how can you do this? Keep track of the conditions at Mavericks today. How has it changed? Because in those early days, like sometimes you're using the outer banks of Ocean Beach as sort of like I'm blanking on the word, but like
Measuring stick, for sure.
measuring
an indicator.
stick, yeah. But now, how has the technology changed and your note taking as well?
Well, the technology is totally different, but I haven't changed what I do, which is I look out my window and I put a guess on it, and it's based on all my experience in the ocean. So to give any day a single number is a huge average. But now there's webcams, there's a whole bunch of other things that can reinforce it. And I said it in one of those Surfline articles, like no one would believe you if you told them you went out and surfed Mavericks on that one day in January, because there's almost nothing in our experience that would match it. So the photography and the buoy data that will show what happened is super important to us, because we, for me to just say I caught a really big fish, but I threw him back, who's going to believe it? It was. So anyway, I was just making observations. Information is great, but also they get it wrong a lot. Mark's awesome, but it's really hard to forecast and predict. And some days are quite a bit different than everyone, even with all this new information, expects. And you got that data to go ahead and match it. You could see their forecast and then see what actually happened. And sometimes a hurricane does something different. Like any storm or any weather is really unpredictable. And within a couple of days, it sometimes makes everybody look stupid.
Absolutely. It's sort of part of the beauty of the sport, right? Is you have to really be attentive. So I think I just want to bring the climate change question to you, and I'm really interested in your answer because you're someone that has just been observing every day these conditions. Have you noticed taller, more powerful, larger waves?
Yeah, and this year we definitely measured them, saw them, surfed them. Those were kind of like maybe a 50-year period where you wouldn't expect to get that many good days in 2 months in maybe the whole 30 years I've been surfing here. As far as though the climate thing, interestingly, for big wave surfers, we're watching the weather out on the other side of the Pacific. Like I want to see what's happening in Siberia because that's what's going to make a storm that's going to affect me in 2 weeks. Or my friends in South Africa are wondering if I want to come and chase a storm down there, or Australia. So we're aware of it on a much bigger level than, what's it look like in front of my house? And that is part of this experience for us, is the pattern that is not just day to day, week to week, month. It's years, decade pattern. And in that, everyone's measuring it. There's been more catastrophic sort of wave activity all over the world.
Yeah, and when I was reporting for this story, a lot of the oceanographers that I talked to always talk about how surfers are really great resources for this exact reason, that they're really keyed into all of the conditions and what's happening. Bianca, I want to talk about this last year at Mavericks, which Grant has been hinting at. You and I first met. We first talked for a story about the swells at Mavericks this past year because they were just unbelievable. It was day after day of huge swells, big clean conditions. There's a ton of ways to catch. I think we're going to show a clip of you surfing on one of those waves. Just, what was it like in the water this past winter? Can you just tell us a little bit about what your experience was like?
Yeah. Well, it was just like what Grant was saying. It was like all of a sudden in December, we had the first swell of the year. And it wasn't just any swell, it was like the day of days kind of swell on the forecast, and no wind. It, as I recall, I think the wind was fluctuating ahead of time, and then it looked to be really light. And that's when, despite COVID, everybody started flying in from all over the world to come surf. And I think those of us who are locals and live nearby were kind of hoping it would be, a sneaky locals only kind of swell. But it was definitely this one of the best swells in the last 4 or 5 years. And it was just this very light offshore wind to start the day, sunny, and giant, huge waves. And people were treating it like a skate park. And yeah, I got a ride out there on a boat at about like 9 a.m. and paddled out and witnessed some of the craziest rides I've seen out at Mavericks. I think I remember seeing Grant Twiggy Baker's wave to start off. And I don't know, what time did you get there, Grant, that day? I remember being in the lineup with you and just, having this huge grin on our faces because we've all been in lockdown and things have been, crappy no matter how good you've got it, wherever you are in the world. But it was just like this aha moment where everyone was so excited and happy to see each other and be out in the water together and to ride these incredible waves. It was a really, really special, memorable day.
I think if we could bring up Grant's calendar again so people could see it. And then, because you can see in this, one of these is January 2021. So that shows the conditions of sort of the peak of the season this year at Mavericks, which is in January. And Grant, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about, you've already done this a little bit, but just expand a little bit on how unique this season was compared to seasons past.
Well, yeah, and just to go back to that day Bianca's talking about, the swell came in the night before, and Twiggy's just one of my best friends that we met on the other side of the world doing this, chasing these big weird waves. But we went out early when they wouldn't be expected to be breaking, and typically these things come in a little earlier than expected. And back to that forecasting thing, a wave so big that shouldn't have been around got me the night before and sucked me in, and I ran for like, I don't know, 5 or 10. I barely got away, and I was just spent. Like, it almost ruined my whole swell because I was used so much energy. But that day is so rare. The next, that beautiful December day, you could almost pick that day and say this is a good season just based on that one day, because you could surf there for 20 years and not get one of those. Then to have a couple more, and then the big day in January, that's when it enters into a rare category. But it was about 10 or 15 really good days in a row around December, on and off. And then it kind of took a break. And then in January, it was about 20 days in a row. And they were all the kind of days that on a bad year, there's none. And so that's like, 25 or 30 really good days.
So
rare.
while this is for a question for both of you, during this period of time when you have all these surfers sort of coming into the state, your community, are you guys talking about this as like climate change, or is it just did it feel extraordinary while it was happening? I think that's my question.
Go ahead, B. I said for sure, like December, no one wants to say it. I'm one of the old guys. I'll be like, yeah, that was the best day. Everyone is hesitant, to put a thing on it. But yeah, no, that December day was the best day in a really long time. You'd have a hard time matching it. Then to have it again, that's incredibly rare. We've had waves that big before, maybe a couple times in 30 years, but not that good. So you knew it. I mean, anyone who was around it much knows it. The kids don't know. All they know is it sucked for most of their life, and this year was good.
Yeah, no, I mean, the year before 2019, there was like one kind of decent day all year, one. And I know because I missed it, I was in Hawaii. So you don't have to feel bad for me. But then, yeah, so December rolls in, and then it's just like day after day after day. And And I remember the night that Grant was talking about that he surfed the night before the big swell in December because they knew it would arrive early. And I have a puppy, and I was down at the beach with my puppy watching Ocean Beach just get humongous, and thinking, okay, I'm gonna need puppy care all day tomorrow, and shoot, I probably missed a session tonight, but you know, it is how it goes. But yeah, it was nonstop. It was epic.
So we've got, just to give some perspective to this, we have a couple other clips that I think we can show. For a long time, this kind of measuring stick for what was a really, really big day at Mavericks happened during a surf competition in 2010. We're going to show some clips here. Grant, can you talk a little bit about how that competition was talked about among big wave surfers, and you know, while it was happening, and then in years after that?
Yeah, and the whole, how do you have a contest out there? It's really hard to get a good day where it's nice and the waves are breaking the whole time. So a lot of the best days, it gets windy or something happens where we only get to surf like half a day. So if you're a person who's organizing an event, it's a challenge. There might be only 1 or 2 good days over the course of the year that you could do it. And that would be just any normal Mavericks day, not waiting for a huge day. And this, as it so happened in 2010, the surfers themselves picked the day because there was sort of nobody in charge of the management group. And we picked this huge day. I actually voted against. I was thinking we should wait a day, but all the younger guys, including Twiggy and Greg Long, they're like, we got to do it. And that day was the biggest surf contest to date. And it was the thing that we all measured it against for the 11, 12 years after. But leading up until that day, the outer ledge at Mavericks, a spot that's past the main peak, was not normally, it was surfed only a few times over the course of 10 or 20 years. And there was never waves ridden from out there during an event. The whole 2010 event was basically held on that outer reef, and no one made it through the heat without backdooring the bull from the outside. That was like a monumental piece of history. And that is what was happening this year, where it became commonplace. All the big waves were ridden from outside the peak with guys connecting it through the main bowl and like go ahead and keeping track of it. Like that was so rare. Like I did an interview with Peter Mel in the beginning, in the early 90s, about would that ever happen? Because we only saw it once in like 5 or 10 years. And he said, yeah, someday someone will do it. And this year he did it like 10 times and he got that big barrel. It was amazing. So, it's really, really rare.
I think Surfline called it maybe the wave of the decade. So we're going to play a couple other clips so people can see this difference. We're going to play a few more that are showing some bigger waves that you've documented that have come in more recently. Can you talk a little bit about how it changes the setup for you as a surfer, and either Bianca or Grant, if you want to chime in on this, when you're paddling into waves that are just like coming in at a whole different angle, a different place, a different size?
Yeah, Bianca, you go, because I know you and I were sitting there when it got so big that no one knows really where to sit, and you can't tell, if you're just going to get completely gobbled up. And usually at Mavericks, we know we're in a good spot or a bad spot. It got so big, we couldn't tell, right? It's just.
Yeah, no, we couldn't tell, but we figured it out. Because right next to the reef, there's a huge deep spot. And so we figured, okay, a wave's not going to break there. And yeah, I mean, when it gets that big, although a few times we did start to paddle to the channel, I mean, the waves were lining up with the mile marker buoy. So we were really, really far out. On a normal day, we're like 300 yards or so in from that, maybe more. But when it's that big, it's really hard to tell. So what I usually do is I tell myself little circle, big circle, or like kindling, campfire. So I try to catch a little one kind of, in a less risky spot. And then if I successfully do it, then I'm like, okay, can I go a little deeper and a little deeper? But yeah, the scale's really, really hard to judge. And it's super scary too.
Yeah,
and
I remember
really exciting. Yeah.
when we were interviewing before, and you were telling me about paddling out, and you were sort of watching waves come in, and then you just saw the shadow just come over, and you looked up, and there was just this monster, and you were paddling out.
Yeah.
What is it? What is it like when you're out there and you see just something come in that's just well beyond what you were expecting?
Yeah, well, I mean, Grant can probably tell you, but for some reason, whenever the biggest waves of the day come and the biggest sets, there is like this shadow before it comes. Don't you think, Grant?
Yeah, for sure. And that's in those patterns. The biggest waves have this like weird eerie calm before, and it's not just one wave, it'll be a big stack. But when you're out there, you're hunting, it's kind of like hunting buffalo with a spoon or something. You're waiting for them to come, and they're coming, and in order to have one or get one, you got to stay there and wait for them to charge you. But um it's so overwhelming as far as like what you're trying to accomplish. You have to commit to an area of the ocean that's basically going to get picked up by a tsunami and thrown into this horrendous impact zone, which is some of that footage you'll see. The wave folds over and it doesn't maybe look that bad, and then it explodes like someone threw a piece of dynamite down there. It's so intense. Just to be near it, you almost have PTSD. If you go for one, whether or not you make it, you're free facing adrenaline. So the pattern of a big set, and there was the one really big set. Twiggy wiped out on that one that we showed at the beginning. After that happened, like everybody is kind of, their ears are ringing from the intensity of the experience, and everybody moved away, and people don't catch waves for like an hour, and it's really fun to be part of those big days. But it's like you're so overpowered, it's just ridiculous. Like none of us, not one person out there feels like, oh, I got this. Like I mean, we're having a great time dodging it, but no one thinks they really can like step up and take on anything that shows up. It's just, the ocean is just so awe-inspiring.
Bianca, how do you prepare? Like, can you just walk us through like what it's like to prepare for a day when you're going out?
Yeah. Preparation is like 24/7, 365. It's all day, every day, pretty much. It's checking the weather forecasts obsessively. And the week leading up to it, I think Grant said now that he's older, he feels relaxed as during the build up to the swell. But I definitely get like anxiety and just start to gather and organize all of my gear and get my boards ready and my leashes ready and check the conditions obsessively, talk to everybody I know who knows about the ocean, and then really try to imagine what it's going to be like. But then pretty much 99% of the time, it's never like what you think it's going to be like, but it's always really awesome. Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting, I just want to say for the audience, if you guys have questions, put them in the chat. I'm going to start working them in here. So we have a question from Derek Shirley. He's asking, how tough is it to surf in big wave conditions with so many more people out in the lineup since Mavericks has become so well known? I think maybe, Grant, do you want to take that one? And Bianca, feel free to jump in and add your thoughts.
Yeah, you know what I mean, even in small waves, a lot of times the most dangerous part of the session is the other people. Mavericks has become very famous and popular. There's not that many really good, really focused big wave surfers, so even though it's a couple hundred, they're not usually all there at the same time. And it's for me, it's been neat because most of them are really qualified, respectful people, and they really are excited about it. So yeah, it's much harder to get a good wave if there's nobody. I mean, it's easier when there's nobody, and it's hard when all those really good surfers are out. But we used to surf it with like no one would go for them. Like we would sit out there for hours, and everyone would sit way off on the side, and none of us was ready to even try it. So now, yeah, there's a bunch of guys that fly in that are really good. It's hard to get waves, but it matches the energy of the spot. The best people in the world are pretty much overwhelmed by this place. So it's okay that there's a crowd, and if we want to go surf without people, there's other places to go.
And Bianca, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I think we take this course every year called the Big Wave Risk Assessment. And it's a safety course, and the number one hazard is crowd. And like Grant said, it doesn't matter if the waves are big or small, people are always the number one hazard. And it's the same thing when you're driving on the freeway. The more cars that are out there, the more likely an accident's going to happen. But at the same time, if you're out there all the time and you're committed and you love it, you still find those windows where there's less people and just have those special moments. And also, like, one of the best feelings is seeing Grant or somebody who I really, really respect and admire catch a great wave. It's just like, it's almost as good as getting one yourself. So it is part of the fun too, is sharing.
Absolutely. So I have one more question for you, Bianca. You've really led the fight for gender equity in surfing. You began pushing for women to compete at the famous Mavericks competition. That fight snowballed into the World Surfing League announcing it would pay male and female surfers equally. I think this advocacy is pretty well known, but I wonder, do you have an environmental philosophy, and was it informed at all by your surfing?
Yeah, I started surfing when I was 7, and I think when I was 9, I joined the Doheny Longboard Surf Association, and we would spend one Saturday a month picking up cigarette butts off the beach. And now, now you don't see very many cigarette butts, but you see tons of microplastics. So my advocacy work began as an environmentalist. And earlier when you asked, like, were surfers talking about climate change with this crazy pattern of swells this past year? And I was thinking that, maybe I'm a little more disconnected because of COVID, but I don't hear people discussing climate change and the waves that often when we're out surfing these swells. Everybody's pretty focused on the waves and the rides, but I don't know. I'm curious to hear if Grant has had any of those conversations about climate change, like during the swells.
Yeah, no, I think actually, particularly those younger guys, if you think Greg Long and Kyle Tierman, there's a lot of really involved surfers in environmental issues, the more so than in any other sport, I would say. That's typical like this. Like the big wave surfers are really passionate. Sure, on those days they're focused on the waves because that's what they're about, but they're also into the patterns, and they for sure are leading the way in a bunch of environmental awareness. That the kids that are surfing are more tied into the natural world than kids playing Nintendo, and there's quite a few that I think are actually more aware of it than I would have been at that time. And it directly relates to what they love to do. So it's selfish on one level, but they all really enjoy sharing it. And I know, Bianca, a lot of other people too that are doing it. We talked before about some of those. It's not just surf rider or someone cleaning up, but passing the love of the ocean and the system, and so whether it's city surf or brown girl surf, or somebody introducing the rest of the population to this experience is going to be environmental just by the nature of that.
So I want to bring in, we're getting tons of great questions here, so I want to bring some more in. First, a comment. Someone's saying, watching surf videos, I see jet skis everywhere. Nice to see big wave riders paddling in. One comment there. We have a question. Is there a limit due to properties of water, shelf slope, etc. on wave height? How large can waves get? What do you, is there a limit, Grant?
No, there's not. There's actually there was a landslide up in Alaska that threw 1,000-foot wave up into an inlet, and they can measure which trees got knocked over, and they know it was 1,000 feet above sea level. The waves can get as big as you can imagine. Can people get near them and catch them? That's where the jet ski argument comes in. That people are able to get onto a wave that they wouldn't normally be able to paddle, but that measuring stick has moved. We used to wonder, can we catch these waves, or do you need a jet ski? And a bunch of people said, oh no, you never get it, we need a jet ski. And then younger, more motivated surfers said, you know what, I don't want the jet ski, I'm going to catch it myself. And they caught waves that were previously thought uncatchable. So yeah, there's no limit to that. The limit is human.
Okay, we've got another good technical question here. Any thoughts on why the local wind conditions were so favorable this winter in Northern California, and how this might tie into climate change, or how it compares to your long-term observations as big wave surfers?
Well, it definitely was. That's the unusual part. The big storms are unusual to a degree, but the really high pressure, really beautiful weather that kept those big storms from coming and then what happened in the middle of the country, like crazy, everybody had weird weather the whole year. So that's, yeah, it is part of it.
And Bianca, you and I talked about this in the story that we did. There was this high pressure ridge that was just hanging over us, and it was pushing all the storms north into the Pacific Northwest. If you look at how much rain Portland got over this winter, they were getting dumped on. And so all the rain that normally would be coming to California was getting pushed into Oregon, Washington, Alaska. But the waves off of those storms, like an arrow, were just pointed at Mavericks. And so it was just swell after swell after swell.
Yeah, that's what I noticed that was different in the pattern, was that these swells and these storms were generating pretty much directly, more or less, north of us in Alaska, instead of coming across the Pacific from Siberia or kind of more down towards Japan. And so we didn't see them coming from as far away, and they were really, really strong and came from a shorter distance. And correct me if I'm wrong, either one of you or Grant, but it looked like a new pattern, that one that I haven't seen.
That's really
That's what I actually said to Twiggy. I said, this is 1994 pattern in before Christmas, like that. After the first pulse, there was a model that it's kind of like it was perfectly positioned. If you were trying to decide where to put it, if you're in Oregon, you were bombed, and if you were Mavericks, you're like, yeah, put it there.
So we've got a question from Wendy Gwen. She asks, what can we expect from wave size and power if we don't get global warming under control? Well, maybe I can just talk a little bit about that, because I've been talking with the researchers that have been studying this. What is really interesting about this wave power metric is that it is observed sea level rise. It's essentially observed changes in the ocean. And my background as a climate change reporter, I've covered rising sea levels for a really long time, but I never built this connection to surfing and waves. So this has been sort of like a fun area of research, or an interesting way that I've connected some old work with now new work. And I think the trend line, to answer your question, is pretty clear. Over 80 years, there's this slow increase in the power of the wave, this energy that they have been able to identify transferred from storms to the surface of the ocean in the form of waves. And the past 20 years, it's really accelerated. So I think going with the assumption of the researchers, which is that this is a warming-driven event from warming ocean temperatures, warming air temperatures, increasing evaporation, getting into the jet stream, creating these more powerful storms, that you would see this to continue to increase. But I'm going to have some reporting out on this soon, and it will include links to these studies, so you can take a look for yourself. We have a question here from Ezra David Romero, who is another climate change reporter on KQED, who's lurking. He asks us, thank you, Ezra, for being here. Witnessing what you went through this past year, the change, what do you think the future of big wave surfing is? Bianca, you want to take that one?
It's always hard to imagine, and it's, that's what it's all about, is like imagining and preparing and planning and dreaming and hoping for more epic winters, but also, not wanting it to be a direct correlation to the ocean warming and millions of species dying. I don't know what to expect. We're at a tipping point. Like, things are crazy. Things change all the time. But I'm hoping that, that everyone can come together and figure out a way to combat global warming, essentially.
This is interesting. And it's especially interesting because you think about just how most people surf is not big wave surfing. And I hinted at this, but, you could see, because of rising sea levels, Santa Cruz is, an amazing place to surf. A lot of the breaks there prefer low tides. And if you have rising sea levels and waves that are coming in at different angles, potentially those breaks change and create different conditions. And then you end up drowning out some breaks, you lose some breaks. So it's, I see the sort of balance that you're talking about there. We have a question from Mr. Rob who says, can you talk about breath holding? This is a huge thing for big wave surfing. Like when you fall in a big wave like that, you get pulled under, you got to regulate your breath. I mean, you guys are the experts. Maybe can you just talk a little bit about that?
I'll go. When we first started, I was petrified of drowning. It's super obvious at Mavericks that that's a thing. We had no vests and none of that. And I used to hold my breath for 4 minutes pretty easily, and I knew I could. And if you want to play, you better be practicing. Like that should be your thing. You should be getting 3 minutes or at least 2.5 minutes. And humans are capable of holding their breath for a long time. It's more about focus and staying calm. So if you're a regular surfer and you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm running out of air, that's actually more mental than reality. And so you can train for that. And that's what, a lot of these people have figured out, whether through meditation and a bunch of other practicing, that part of it's really not usually the problem, getting really hurt or, killed that way. But you're not likely to be held down for more than a couple, maybe a minute. So it's actually more about getting fit and being comfortable.
Bianca, is there anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, that like what Grant said, he could hold his breath for 4 minutes, and he's 6'6", and he's a big dude, and I'm 5'4", and I never knew I could hold my breath for 4 minutes until I took a free diving course, and so yeah, that's definitely part of the big wave program, is taking not only these safety courses, but free diving courses and Wim Hof courses, and just courses to learn how to optimize your performance in different conditions. And I was pretty pumped when I got to a 4-minute breath hold. And our instructor did teach us that, like, whatever you can get on a static breath hold, which is one when you're not moving, when your heart rate's elevated, you'll probably be able to get a quarter of that. So yeah, one of my longest hold downs have been like 50 seconds, and that was a long time. So knock on wood, it's not longer, but
yes,
yeah, it's important work.
That is scary. We have a really important question here from Emily Washburn, who I believe is Grant's daughter. It says, hi, Dad. The St. Ignatius Surf Club has a very important question for you. What is it like to be old?
It's awesome. No, there's nothing like watching a bunch of kids not be able to paddle out. No, we've been having a great time with them, the surf club at the high school. And it's also one of the greatest things about surfing is that you can do it when you're young, and you can keep doing it when you're older and share it with everybody. And that experience is really transformative for anyone. And she's involved with some stuff with the kind of ride of a wave and therapy, surf therapy. She wants to go study it. It's pretty neat. Surfing is special, and it's an unusual way for everyone to encounter and have fun in the natural world.
Well, shout out to the St. Ignatius Surf Club. I would also say, we had talked about this wave that Peter Mell, who is a surfer from Santa Cruz, caught at Mavericks this past year that was getting all this attention. It was called the wave of the decade. Peter Mell is in his early 50s, I believe. And it's just amazing to see. It was amazing to see him catch that ride. It was such a beautiful ride, and he just read the wave perfectly. You don't have to be the youngest, like most athletic person out there. You just have to really understand it. And I think that's something that's really cool that I learned about this sport, is that it is something you could do for your entire life. Okay, let's see. We got some more questions here from Claire Chen Carter. She says, are most other famous big wave sites globally reporting larger big waves in the last year or season? Well, so I would say this wave power metric is not reported at specific sites. This is actually waves that are identified out in the deep ocean. And it is more pronounced in the Pacific, where we are, than in other places around the world. But it is something that they have tracked in other places. And when I have my story up, you'll be able to link to the research out of UC Santa Cruz, and they can get into more detail there. Okay, Julian Ashton says, can you find surf spots big enough to practice for Mavericks around here?
Ocean Beach.
Ocean
Yeah.
Beach.
Yeah, just it's really good to get the training at Ocean Beach. It's a hard place to surf, but I kind of feel like that's how I was able to handle Mavericks. If you don't want to learn at Mavericks, so big beach breaks are a great place to get beat up.
I'm just reading through some other questions here.
Where do you think, B?
Yeah, I 1,000,000% agree. Ocean Beach is like a big wave meets a class 5 river, whether it's 2 foot or 20 foot. It's hard work. You got to do a million duck dives and paddle for miles. And yeah, it's gnarly. So it is a great training ground.
Okay, so this is a related question. How large is the gap in the skill level for surfing Mavericks compared to surfing a big day at Ocean Beach in San Francisco?
I don't think the skill level is not the thing. It's a survival talent, right? Like you don't have to be that good a surfer to be able to ride Mavericks. You have to be a really tough and trained individual to survive it under a worst case scenario or even a moderate scenario. So Ocean Beach is really forgiving. It's going to push you to the shore. It might drown you, but it's not going to hold you in a cliff or push you into a cave underwater. And you're unlikely to get held down for more than 2 waves at Ocean Beach. At Mavericks, none of that is unusual. So the difference is not about how good a surfer you are.
Okay, we're gonna need to wrap up here in a minute. I'm gonna try and just get through a couple of more of these questions because they're really good ones. What's the best big wave board you guys own?
Mine's a Bob Pearson 9.6 made with eco resin. There's no fumes that are emitted, and yeah, that's what it is. Pink Starburst.
I have a few pieces of some Pearsons here too. I love Bob. And Jeff Clark makes great boards, and I've been riding very unusual Mark Andrini edge boards, which are completely new. And that back to like what is going to happen in 5 or 10 years, I'd expect the technology for the surfboards to help the guys and girls ride bigger and better waves.
How do you ensure that you do not encounter predatory sea animals?
I say a prayer before I go out every time, or I kind of like a gratitude, just like thank you for having me in your home, to the sharks and the whales. And that's one part of surfing that is so special, is like anytime you see a dolphin or a seal, you just have this moment where your heart grows and you really do feel so connected to the earth and the ocean and the wildlife. And that's where a big source for me of inspiration to advocate on behalf of the environment.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Just like kind of go with the flow and don't act like prey.
Yeah.
So if you're don't pee, and just be calm and calculated in what you're doing, and it seems to work out. I know occasionally that's not a real big fear for most of us. It is out there, and that's a reality. But you're part of the system, and you're not really naturally food for them, so it's not a really concern.
Well, I think we can. Let's wrap up on that. I want to say thank you to both of you for joining me here. And then I also want to just say a big thank you to Groundswell, to the City Surf Project, and to Brown Girl Surf, who helped spread the word about this event. Check out more info about them in the chat. And really thank you to the audience for joining us here. Appreciate the spirited discussion. Make sure you're following Bianca and Grant, and I'll have a story up around these issues in the next week or so. So thanks so much to everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful